warm welcome to each one of you. So wonderful to have this opportunity to practice together. I know I always say that, but it's always true for me. And I appreciate these gatherings and seeing your faces. And let me just check one thing. Okay. And I don't see Claudia, but if she comes, we will start the Spanish interpretation. But for now, I think we will go ahead. So this being the Sunday Sound of Dhamma here in lovely Alexandria, as in London, as in any other part of the world, we will go ahead and begin with about 10 minutes or so of guided meditation. And then I'll offer the Dhamma talk and hopefully leave enough time for some questions, reflections, comments, and sharing of the blessings. So you can go ahead and begin to perhaps move your body a bit, bringing yourself into a balanced, comfortable position. Allowing the body to settle right here on your seat or whatever supports you might have. And relaxing the belly. Really sensing the natural stability of the body in this place at this time. And turning the attention to the sensations of hearing, just allowing whatever sensations of hearing may arrive in awareness. And as you attend to the sensations of hearing, you might notice the start and the presence and the end of individual sensations. And perhaps all sorts of thoughts and other perceptions are also happening. But with your attention, you can just allow the sensations of hearing to be at the forefront. And as you settle in to attention to sensations of hearing, you might notice that some of those sensations are pleasant, some are unpleasant, and you might notice that some are neutral. And as we approach the last few moments of the meditation, you might just check in again with other aspects of the bodily experience. How's the body feeling now? Beautiful. So that brings us to the Dhamma talk. And as usual, I start with the homage and refuges. So if you'd like to chant along with your mic still muted, please feel welcome to do that. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. You may have noticed that in Buddhism, we do a lot of talking about the self. What is the nature of the experience of the self? There is no self, there is a self. Investigate yourself. You might hear a lot about that. And interestingly, we have these teachings that are intended to clarify this matter for us, this question of the self and what it is or what it isn't. But they are given to us in the form of telling us how things are. And so, for one thing, it's a good idea to remember that belief may or may not be helpful. In hearing the Dhamma, the most important part is for you to learn about, to investigate, inquire, check in with your own experience as to whether this is actually describing the reality that you experience or not. And oftentimes it will take some curiosity. It will be unfamiliar. In fact, I hope that it is oftentimes unfamiliar, new territory. Because if the Dhamma simply is made to fit into your regular understanding, which is at times confused, then something maybe has been missed. Maybe you haven't quite gotten the kernel of it or the observation. So today I want to talk about one of the particular frameworks that I often mention and that the Buddha himself often mentioned for understanding our experience and how it generates this idea of a permanent, continuous, impenetrable self. And that framework is the framework of the 5 khandhas. Khandhas is the word in Pali, and skandhas is the word in Sanskrit. It's usually translated as aggregates. It literally means something like heaps, or like the bulk of a thing. And that's very telling about how to relate to this framework also. So what the Buddha has given us in terms of the 5 aggregates is not an effort to say that these represent the only qualities of experience that we might have, but rather to say he has aggregated, he's grouped together certain types of experience, certain aspects of a human life in such a way that we can begin to better understand how they relate to each other and how we might relate to them. Yeah. So, so the 5 aggregates is a teaching that he gave again and again. In fact, the Buddha very clearly states in a number of suttas that once you develop some concentration and some clarity of mind, some ability to settle your mind and observe clearly, then the 5 aggregates are what you need to look at. The 5 aggregates are the way to investigate. And in fact, there's also a wonderful sutta that I wasn't planning on talking about, but just to mention it is Venerable Khemaka, who is very near death. He's on his deathbed, and some other elders are asking him questions about his practice. And in this time, by talking to them about the fact that he's just shy of full awakening, he mentions the need to return to the 5 aggregates. And that actually puts him over the edge. So he unfolds it again, and it yields its beautiful fruit for him. But that aside, we will see what kinds of fruit it yields for us. So I have to say, so nice to have the big books. I have digital copies too, but having the actual books for me is always really nice. So this is the main sutta that I'm going to speak about today is a sutta from the Samyutta Nikaya. The Samyutta Nikaya is often translated as collected discourses. That's Nikaya is a group of discourses or a group of teachings, and Samyutta means connected together. And so, or sometimes they're called linked. And the Samyutta Nikaya is actually, there's a whole chapter, the 22nd Samyutta in this collection is all about the 5 aggregates. Over 150 suttas about the 5 aggregates and how to practice with them, just in this chapter, let alone in other parts of the discourses where the Buddha speaks about this particular framework. So it's something that he felt was important, obviously, because it's come through again and again. And In fact, in that grouping, in the chapter 22, in a different sutta, in sutta number 24 of that grouping, that chapter, he says, without directly knowing and fully understanding the five aggregates, one cannot bring an end to suffering, period. And by fully, directly knowing and fully understanding the five aggregates, one can bring an end to suffering. So they're pretty important. So the main sutta that I want to talk about is a sutta in which he gives a series of metaphors, and he tells us what are the five aggregates like? What are the five aggregates, and what are they really like? Again, the Buddha telling us the way it is. It's up to us to discern that within our own experience. So the first of the five aggregates is rupa. Rupa in Pali means body or material form made out of earth, air, fire, and water. As it was understood, the great elements as they were understood in Indian culture. I could say more about that, but suffice to say that it's not as simplistic an idea as it seems. It's actually quite practical. But the body, the Buddha says in this discourse, is like a lump of foam. He says that the body, the material form of this body is just like a lump of foam that he would see on the river Ganges. Now think about that for a second. Your body is the same as that stuff at the top of your latte, or as that stuff you're rinsing off your dishes, or, right? Just a little bit of foam. It's that insubstantial. It's that fleeting. It's that fragile. And just to take in that much information is quite a bit, right? For us to learn how to practice with the body as a fleeting phenomena, as a phenomena that is much more insubstantial than the way that we typically relate to it, as being solid, as representing me, as being continuous. Yeah. So he says, one, I have to get my glasses on, hang on. Speaking of the body being insubstantial. One inspects it, ponders it, and carefully investigates it, and it would appear to him to be insubstantial, hollow, void. For what substance could there be in a form which is like this, right? Which is this kind of insubstantial. And then he goes on to the next one. So the next one is Vedana. Vedana is the Pali word. And that means, it's usually translated, I like to translate as feeling tone. So just as you saw in the meditation earlier, right? When we have some kind of perception of a sensation of some type in the body, whether it's something you hear, something you taste, something you think, right? All of those things have a tone to them. They're either pleasant or they're unpleasant, or they're just kind of nebulous, neutral, indiscernible. Yeah. And so he says, feeling tone is like a bubble. Like he says, like, I really appreciate this way he describes it, because you can see his strength of observation in these beautiful metaphors and the way he talks about these things. He says, in the autumn, when it's raining and big raindrops, large raindrops are falling, a water bubble arises and bursts on the surface of the water. So right? He's talking about a very careful observation. And that kind of observation comes with practice. In fact, it's sometimes very funny, right? You'll see people go on retreat and then they start posting to their Instagram account or their Facebook account some photo of like a little dewdrop, right? Or a leaf. They're like, oh, look. And I love when that happens because it's like, right, you're seeing, you're waking up, you're seeing your life, this experience right here, right now. Even the most mundane thing. Yeah. So he says, yes, feeling tone is just like a bubble that comes on the surface. You might imagine like a surface of a pond or a puddle somewhere. You get a little, the raindrop falls, you get a little bubble, and then poof, it pops, right? That's the feeling tone. So that feeling of pleasant, tremendously pleasant, I want more of that. My whole life is driven around whether I could get rid of the things that I find painful and unpleasant, or get more of the stuff that I find pleasant and attractive. He says, it's just like that. It's just a very momentary phenomena, insubstantial. And then he comes to perception. So that's sanya in Pali, perception. Perception means that when we have some kind of experience, we have any kind of a sensation at the six sense gates that sparks a Vedana, that sparks a feeling tone, but it also sparks a perception of what the thing is. So this is very closely related to memory. It's the way we label something. If your first language is Spanish, you would say una flor. You see a flower, right? Or whatever it is. Perception is our way. Sometimes we don't even have a word, but we relate one thing to another and we say, oh, this is what it is. We identify what it is. Perception is often wrong, right? There are very famous stories about this, like the monk walking through the forest who sees a kind of curved thing on the ground and is startled. Oh my gosh, there's a snake. And he stands there terrified. I have to decide whether or not to turn back because there's a snake on the trail. But then he, with a little courage, with a little trepidation, he steps forward one more step and realizes that it's just a branch. So our perception is like this, and we often find this and kind of sweep it under the rug. How many times a day do you have a perception that is incorrect? And you notice that, and you just sort of brush it off, rather than just take a moment to acknowledge, oh yeah, right, a mistaken perception, or an accurate one. Either way, they're both instructive, but the Buddha says a perception is like a mirage. This is one of my favorite metaphors in all the Dhamma. All perception, think about this for a moment, all perception is like a mirage. So maybe you're in the desert somewhere, maybe you're just driving a car when it's hot. It happens to be summer right now in many parts of the world. And you look out on the road and you see a little shimmer like water out there on the road or on the sand. Right? But then as you get closer, what happens? You realize, oh, there's no water there. It just disappears. Because there was never any water there. It just looked like there was. And so this is also pointing at, and we'll see that all of these 5 metaphors are also very subtly pointing at some very important phenomena here. And different schools of Buddhism would argue with me on this, but I'm going to give it to you the way that early Buddhism understands it. And that is that there is a physical and an energetic phenomena that is happening here in body and mind. Buddhism isn't saying, at least early Buddhism isn't saying, there isn't this thing. When we say it's empty or insubstantial or hollow or void or any number of other words that you see people use, also in this sutta, it doesn't mean that there isn't some phenomena there. What it means is that it is empty of a permanent self. It is empty of any kind of continuity, actually. It is a mere phenomena with a rising, a persistence, and an ending. And all things are like that. They're all based on the conditions and the causes that make them present, right? Just like seeing the water out there on the road, the shine, right? That is due to the heat and the air and the way that the light is reflected. So there is a phenomena that's happening there, but it's not what we think it is. It's not what we take it to be. And in the same way, this body and mind, everything that we experience in this body and mind is not what we take it to be. And it's only by getting closer, so I'm going to stretch the metaphor even a little further. It is only by getting closer that we can actually know that. Now, mind you, that when it comes to your own body and mind, there is no such thing as closer or further away, right? This is the body and mind that you're working with here. But there is a feeling, there can be a feeling of getting closer to your experience, of becoming more intimate with it, right? You might experience this in meditation. You might experience this suddenly, like that, like the person taking the photo of the dewdrop. Huh? And it's only by doing this and with care, with mindfulness, that we will see the nature of the mirage that is the self. Because that is what the Buddha is telling us. So let me get to the other couple of ones, and then I will say some more about this, because he goes on to say, so then, this one always brings a laugh for me. So the next one is sankhara. Sankhara is a very complex word with many, many different meanings and many different frameworks that the Buddha offered. And this particular framework, sankharas can be understood as responses and reactions to what? To the perceptions and the feeling tones that we're having. So just as I was saying a moment ago, you have a feeling tone, you have an experience of something very pleasant, and you perceive whatever it is, pancakes, and you say, the sankhara is, I want more of that. Okay, that's the sankhara, that's the reaction to it or the response to it. Huh? So sankharas includes volition, it includes choice, right? Choices we make. But it's not just choice, and you will see certain teachers who have sort of reduced it down to that, and I would say it's probably not quite that narrow a category, especially here in this framework. So the Buddha says, in terms of the metaphor, he says, okay, sankharas are like the wood, the heartwood, strong wood of a plantain tree. So now this always reminds me of my childhood, right? Because my dad wanted to plant, we lived in Florida at the time, he wanted to plant a plantain tree in the front yard of our place. We'd finally scraped together enough money to buy a little house. And so he wanted to put a plantain tree. He's from Colombia, from Bogota. So that would make him feel at home. And so he planted the tree and he watered it because he wanted the tree to be big and strong. It turns out he watered it too much and the whole thing just collapsed, just totally fell over. Poor dad, no plantain tree. Why? Because plantain trees actually don't have a trunk. They actually do not have a core. They are just leaves wrapped around one another. Just one leaf on top of the next. So it makes it seem more substantial. It makes it seem stronger. It stands up straight. It looks like a tree. But actually, it's just leaves layered one on top of another. In the same way, our responses and reactions are merely thoughts layered one on top of the other. And it makes it seem more substantial than what it is. It makes it seem like it has more strength. And that can be something that is hard to see through, to be willing to let go of. That clinging to your thoughts as your strength, as what defines you, as what's permanent about you, or what's real about you. And lastly, the fifth of the five aggregates, vijnana. Vijnana means consciousness. So I don't want to get too deep into that topic, but I will say this. Consciousness is, in this framework, the Buddha is actually speaking about two different ways of experiencing consciousness. So when I was a young girl, we used to talk about light as both a particle and a wave, right? That was the right answer in physics class. Is light a particle or a wave? The answer is both, right? A and B. And our consciousness is like that as well. We have an experience sometimes of consciousness as a stream, and the Buddha speaks about it in that way. Something that is waiting for a contact to come. You could say a presence or a kind of a awareness that is impacted by an experience. But you also have then a moment, a momentary consciousness, right? A particle. Within that stream, what's actually happening is individual mind moments. And individual mind moments have a distinct beginning, middle, and end. Yeah? So what the Buddha is saying about consciousness in the five aggregates is that the consciousness is necessary together with the body, for there to be a contact. That the bodily sensations come together, but they're only known if there's a consciousness and the appropriate object. And when those three things come together, that's called phassa. Phassa in Pali, contact. So I don't want to get too much into that, but we can address it in the questions. But I do want to say, so the metaphor he gives us is, again, on this same theme of it's not what it looks like. There's something happening there, but it's not what it looks like. The metaphor is consciousness is a magician's trick, like a sleight of hand, like the quarter looking like it's coming out of your cousin's ear, right? It didn't actually come out of the ear. Or like the card or the rabbit out of the hat or whatever magician's trick occurs to you. Now they do big things like hide an elephant or whatever. I don't know. So I hear. Yeah. But it's not actually what it looks like. If you get closer, if you observe, you can see what's actually happening there, right? Or maybe you learn how to do the trick yourself. And then you see through it. So what about all this? So insubstantiality, something about phenomena, something about arising and ceasing, seeing all of that, observation. And then we see, again, that is completely insubstantial. But then what happens, right? That we learn, oh, so this idea of self is false, or this idea of self is part of what's causing me suffering. And then we're like, oh, I need to get rid of that. I'm going to cut out the self, or I'm going to push that away, or I'm going to stop that from happening. Yeah. And so this kind of courage is beautiful. Of course, we need courage on the path, as I was saying already today. But that idea that somehow you will cut out the self or get rid of the self, is already a mistaken notion, is it not? The water isn't there. So in a funny way, it's just making matters worse. It's just strengthening the mistaken view. You know, it puts me in mind of, goodness knows I'm not an expert at these things, but there's a Star Wars movie in which the old Luke Skywalker is having a fight, a sword fight, with some young guy in black. I don't know the names of the characters anymore. But anyway, he's like stalling for time. And then you see that it's actually just an emanation. It's just his mind, right? That the young guy's actually not even fighting him directly. It's just his mind, body, because he's actually, they show him later sitting kind of on a rock face somewhere, which is kind of interesting because only very advanced yogis can send emanation bodies. That's whether you believe that or not, that's up to you. But what the idea was is this guy, right, is that chagrin to find that he's not even fighting with the thing he thinks is there, the person that he thinks is there. And in that same way, if you want to get into a fight with yourself in order to get rid of your dukkha, that's just a fight for no reason, right? That's just a harmful attitude toward your own experience. So don't do that. There's no need to fight with swords against yourself. The idea is to see through the mirage of self, to see with deep clarity the nature of your experience, how it really is, just with clear authenticity. And when it is seen with clear authenticity, then the mirage disappears of its own. There's no fight involved. There's no pushing away. There's no stopping any kind of behavior. It's just clear. That idea, that old idea, didn't really make sense, didn't really capture what was really happening. So don't get into a fight with yourself. Get to know it. What is it? What is it that feels like that? Step closer. Step closer to your experience. And find that beautiful clarity that will free you from all fighting.